Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix. The big society, the big idea, the good life, there's many different terms used for the same thing. And in the early phases, they often called it the good life, but what they really meant was a scientifically run society, an ordered society where the unfit wouldn't breed. Eugenics is a big part of it, and depopulation was a big part of it, still is a big part of it today, very big part of it in fact. And I've gone through the histories on this particular show. I won't go through them again, to do with eugenics and the organizations and foundations which funded a lot of the big programs in eugenics in the US and Britain and elsewhere. But there were big players, and yep, members of the aristocracy, the Huxleys, all these guys were involved in eugenics. They were fascinated by the idea that science eventually could create the perfect society through tinkering with genes and so on. But they also wanted to bring in a society where people would be forbidden, certain people would be forbidden to have children. They thought that the idea of mandatory sterilization was a very good idea for certain people, and that was picked up upon, of course, by even the Soviets picked up on that one, and so did Adolf Hitler. It's quite amazing how old this particular agenda is. And you'll find it even in the writings of Blavatsky and Annie Besant that took over, that they'd bring in a new society, this wonderful new society, this socialistic ordered society where science would take over. It's always the same thing. Science would take over. And, of course, we go into guys like Charles Galton Darwin, who wrote The Next Million Years, who furthered that and said that scientists and technocrats would be the ones who would rule on behalf of the dominant minority. Huxley touched on that too. Touched on it. The dominant minority would always be above academia and the technocrats, who would just kind of run the public in a Sovietized type fashion. And that's the system we're in today. They said democracy was too cumbersome. It really stopped progress. There's too many bickering parties and self-interested parties and factions. Therefore, to get the big idea and the program across, they'd have to basically train the public gradually into a new system, so cleverly too that they wouldn't know they were no longer in a democracy. And then you go into the Club of Rome, a big think tank for the United Nations, who also said the same thing. They said that democracy is too cumbersome, has to go. And believe you me, it has gone. As you're well aware, I hope, out there, you're well aware that it has gone. And then you get the big organizations that are also part of this, that you think of as merely the kind of right-wing type ones working with the left, like the Council on Foreign Relations. Quigley himself, the historian for the CFR, said we're often mistaken for communists why? Because their ideas and their agenda were exactly the same direction as communism. And then, of course, going deeper into that, you find out, sure enough, the big boys and the big bankers funded communism into existence. The dialectic is always used between left and right, up and down, to come out at the same goal. You end up on the same road at the end. That's the fascinating thing about this. And we're given many false debates, many false arguments to chase our tails with and keep us busy. We're given lots of counterintelligence put out there too. Why would they allow you to run away with the internet without giving you counterintelligence to tick you off in circles into the stars and creatures that should be made into shoes and belts and stuff like that? They're supposed to be kind of humanoid, if you get my drift. This is all counterintelligence, to mix fact with fiction and ridicule the fact. That's a simple tactic with it. And it's interesting too that Professor Carl Quigley said that the group, the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, which is just the American branch of the Royal Institute for International Relations in London, he said we were often mistaken for communists, he says, and we have no aversion to working with them. That's what he said in Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American establishment. And they work with dictators, communists and whatever. Communists are very good because communists are really the main organized group in the world. Communists are very dedicated to what they do. The far lefties are very, very dedicated. And literally, and George Orwell showed you the mentality of them in his book 1984, that communistic mindset of training and the ability to take a new idea that totally contradicted yesterday's idea and spouted out as though you'd always believed it. Well, that's how the communists are. And if we go into a deep freeze, you'll find the same thing with the climatologists, who basically are all part of the socialist left that used to be called communists. That's why they use them all, because they want an ecological scientific group to run the world, exactly as the Soviet system wanted to. And they have the ability to get told we're going into a deep freeze and immediately parrot that, as though they did never mention global warming. That's the mindset of that type of personality. I've met quite a few of them, and it's always astonishing to listen to them prattle off the party line. And what I realized too in communism years ago is that there can be no dissent. It was all from the top down, what you had to say, what they had to believe. And when they told someone the latest line, it was like a robot talking to you. And you look in their eyes to see if they really believed what they were saying. And they would be hostile, very hostile, against even a challenge of basically countering them or questioning them on it. That's the type they've got running the IPCC at the United Nations for so-called climate change now, as I've toned it down to climate change. And last night I was sent a link, an audio link from the abc.net Australia by Will in Australia. And it's an interesting audio. I'm going to put the link up tonight after the show at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And listen to this. This is for journalists, as journalistic panel debating the new way they will report news about climate change to the general public. It's fascinating. Fascinating to listen to them. Now, you remember me talking about 2 months ago when the IPCC at the United Nations said that they were going to work differently and train journalists to put it across, the whole climate change agenda across in a different way to the general public. Well, you see, they're already doing it. They're already doing it, and they're all on board. But when I listen to this bunch of so-called independent, free-thinking journalists talking, I thought I was listening to a Communist Party meeting. I'm not kidding about it. Because every tactic they'd use, smear campaigns on their enemies and so on, nasty name calling about their enemies, was used. They actually had, a loathing for Christopher Monckton, who was given exposure on Australian television and radio. And Christopher Monckton knows his stuff. He just put out facts, figures, and so on. He didn't give us opinions. These guys tried to say he just gave us opinions. And from now on, they said they're not going to report people's opinions and climate deniers' opinions. You see? But they called him all kinds of nasty words, these wonderful independent reporters. So you have to listen to this, because you're going to find, you see, the same meetings with your own journalists in each country as going on at the same time. They must have consensus. You understand? Consensus building. They actually put out people from the UN and the big think tanks, the charitable foundations that run the world. They put them out to go around just building consensus so they all talk with one voice. An old idea. They use it in politics too when they come out and use catchphrases like weapons of mass destruction. So no matter who they're talking to, you'll hear weapons of mass destruction. Well, it's the same idea with the journalists on climate change. You'll hear the same party line toads, regardless of how ludicrous it might sound with the deep freezing weather we're going into. Now, as I say, I put that link up, the audio, but I looked into this group of journalists, and it says here about Australian Centre for Independent Journalism. And it says the Australian Centre for Independent Journalism reporting, this is what they're reporting to, and they're reporting at the Munster Forum. They call it the Munster Forum, Climate Change Munster Forum. And it says, this is what they said in this audio: the scientific consensus about the increasing scale and urgency of climate change has made journalism's commitment to traditional concepts of fairness and balance obsolete. I hope you heard that, right? The scientific consensus about the increasing scale and urgency of climate change has made journalism's commitment to traditional concepts of fairness and balance obsolete. So you're not going to get a fair and balanced journalistic opinion on anything. You're going to have the scientific, the authorized scientific version. That's actually mentioned in the audio, that's all they're going to report from now on. It says the Australian Centre for Independent Journalism, what a joke, eh? Aims to stimulate the production of high-quality journalism, no kidding, especially investigative journalism, to conduct and support research into journalism and the media, to contribute to scholar debate and research about journalism, and to promote community discussion about the relationship of journalism to political, social, and cultural democracy. So we're getting it from the far, far lefties who are, I'm not kidding, these people are radical. They really believe in what they're up to. They believe that any lie is okay as long as they can get their ecological society brought in. You know, very little factories, very little this and that. Now, they truly believe that mankind's the worst plague on the planet, these characters. Especially the lesser types, the ones who don't have the jobs like journalists do. It says the Centre is a non-profit organisation, no kidding, based at the Broadway campus of the University of Technology, Sydney. And activities of the Centre include publications of investigative journalism, provision of resources and reference services, continuing education for practicing journalists, and research in journalism, and yada, yada, yada. Now, that's one little bit about this particular group that's on the audio, and I'll go into another one here too, and it's got, actually I'll hit it when I come back, and that's quite something to read. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, we're back, cutting through the matrix, talking about this particular audio out over radio in Australia, and how these journalists have come to consensus that they should only report the scientific side of things from the IPCC at the United Nations, and never bother with any opposing points of view, which are just simply unscientific, you see. So they've all agreed on that. But who made up this panel of independent journalists? Well, it was headed off by this one here. You've got Anne Henderson Sellers. No relation to Peter, I don't think. He had a sense of humour. But it says here, Australian Research Council Professorial Fellow in the Department of Environment and Geography of Macquarie University. In other words, she makes her living off this stuff, you see. Professor Anne Henderson, double-barrel name, Henderson-Sellers, was a director of the World Climate Research Program in 2006 and 2007. Well, she's very fair, isn't she? And she'll represent a good side of the story. And was the director of the Environment Division at ANSTO from 1998 to 2005. She was the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Development of the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology from 96 to 98. Prior to this, she was the founding director of the Climatic Impact Centre at Macquarie University, where she continues to hold a professorial in physical geography. Professor Henderson Sellers previously led the WMO project for intercomparison of land surface parameterization schemes, which operates as an international internet-based collaboratory. She recently led the Model Evaluation Consortium for Climate Assessment called MECA, oh, I love their names, MECCA, analysis team. She also acts as a consultant to the United Nations University on various aspects of the impact of climate. Very impartial person here to be involved in this little debate there, as she laid down the parameters of where they were to go in the talk. So that's one of them. And then we've got Sarah Clark, ABC's National Environment and Science Correspondent. You understand, every radio station, every television company, every newspaper has their own correspondent now on environment. In other words, these are the hack ones who couldn't get a job writing anything else. And it's so safe to write on this stuff, the handouts that they get handed all the time on greening, and so on, that they've got a lot to lose if this whole thing goes down the tube. So they're very impartial, as you know, very, very impartial. So she's the National Environment and Science Correspondent for ABC. It says she's the ABC's National Environment Science Correspondent, reporting for both ABC radio and television. She's travelled extensively around Australia, reporting on the environment and the impacts of the drought and climate change across a number of programmes, including ABC's 7 p.m. News, Late Line Report, Foreign Correspondent, and across radio news and ABC's flagship radio current affairs programmes AM, The World Today, and PM. Her brief is extensive and covers climate change, space exploration, that's certainly where she is, water issues, drought and future technologies. Recent assignments include covering the United Nations Climate Conference in Copenhagen. She's well in there, isn't she? A trip to the Arctic Circle to visit an Inuit village in northwest Alaska, living in a vulnerable and changing environment. Oh, there's a woman with guts. An assignment in the Antarctic alongside a team of scientists and ongoing coverage reporting on the state of the Murray-Darling Basin. So she gets to travel an awful lot, South Korea, Pacific Islands, the Caribbean, South Africa and Chile, reporting for the ABC. So that's another one that attended is on the audio too. Then there's Ben Cubby, who's the environment editor at the Sydney Morning Herald. Well, he's a very impartial guy. He'll give you impartial news on the environment, obviously, since he's also making his living off it. He's associate professor, there's Philip Chubb, associate professor of journalism, Monash University, and the link's up there for that too. Philip's career as a journalist combines leadership positions in print, television, online media with publishing, business and communications technology. Then he goes through his history as well. And he's obviously well up there and got lots of friends in high places, in the right kind of clubs, you might say. So he also was making his living on this as well. And it's quite fascinating to realize that everyone who slanged anybody at all, and you should hear the words in this audio, you'll hear the words that they call anyone who they call climate deniers, you should hear the names. All they can do is resort to calling them names. That's standard left-wing policy. Because you cannot attack the reasoning of certain people who've come up with their science. Not only that, they never mentioned all the hundreds of scientists who left the IPCC because they wouldn't go along with lies. That wasn't mentioned at all. Wasn't mentioned at all. Quite something. But you understand that's happening in every country. They all get on board. So anything that you read, and I hope you always understand this and never forget this, never ever forget this. Whatever you read in any mainstream journal or newspaper or magazine, it has got consensus with the reporting to do with climate change and other social topics as well. Because there's a big world agenda here, and these people are all getting highly paid to make sure that you get the kind of news they want you to believe. And it certainly is anything but impartial and fair and balanced. But in this particular group, they have admitted they can't do fair and balanced reporting. It was just too imperative to save the planet, etc. And so they'll only give you the official announcements from the IPCC. There's fairness for you. How's that for an agenda? Huh? And you think you're living in a free, open, democratic society. Back with more after this. Hi folks, I'm back and we're cutting through the matrix. This system we're going into, we're actually really into it, well into it. The youngsters are already into it through their conditioning and indoctrination in schools, starting at kindergarten, into the greening society, sustainability. They're all part of the Millennial Project, Agenda 21, all the names for the same thing really, where we're going to live under an ecological scientific grouping or dictatorship in little community areas within regions, because there'll be no more nations at the end of it. That's always been the big plan. And of course, all the groups at the top, all the opposing groups that you think are opposing, the far left, the far rights, the corporations, and so on, are all part of it. They're all in it together, using the dialectic to bring us into it. Because they all agreed long ago that this is the way they were going to take the world. And as I say, you can go into H.G. Wells' book, A Modern Utopia, and you get glimpses of it even there, as far back as when he wrote that one, with the help of his masters, of course, who financed him. But he was also a mouthpiece for the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society was just a group created by the Royal Institute for International Affairs to manage the left-wing radicals, to make them really push towards a utopia, thinking it was going to be a wonderland for the worker. All run by the elite, of course. Just look out who the founders were. But regardless, as I say, they're all working together towards the same road to bring you all back onto the same road at the end of all the fighting. That's how the Hegelian technique works. And to be honest with you too, they've already set everything up around you. You're already inside a cage. You've got all these different organizations working right into your local level and on your local councils. They're handing out different agendas to even your roads and works department and all that kind of stuff. Wherever you happen to live, you're all going to do, it's all to do with sustainability, and austerity is now tied in with it as well, budget cutting and so on. And in Britain, they're a little bit ahead of the US. They've already announced the big society, and communitarianism has been put into action. They've trained the leaders years ago under Common Purpose. There's this particular group called Common Purpose, who will be the local commissars pretending to speak on behalf of the public and the people. And they'll eventually have to go as a part of a region to the World Bank to borrow money. That's what will happen to all of your little communes. You'll have reps that get sent over to talk to the big boys and decide how much cash you're going to get and what you're going to give back in return for it, because nothing is going to be free. Nothing is going to be free. You understand that countries themselves, as they've been for a long time, are really, each country, each nation is a business. Collectively, we are all one big massive business for the bankers and the taxations and all the rest of it. Doesn't matter how many businesses comprise it. We are one big business. That's how they view us. And that's why they're bringing carbon taxation, eco-taxation of all kinds as well through the World Bank and through the Rothschild Bank, before it gets to the World Bank, of course, through carbon credits and so on. This is to take over from the country, the nation as a business, which they loved, to the next system, which should be easier for them. They've got the whole world with regions in it, and they can tax each individual directly to this world system. It's far better for the big banking boys, who will always be in charge, being the dominant minority. And what they're doing in communitarianism is also saying, oh, look, the government can't handle these big budgets anymore. There's too many people and there's too much debt as they pay off more money to the bankers. They're still bailing them out, you know. And the bankers are still giving out their billion-dollar bonuses to their pals. But regardless of that, which we all know, what they're going to do is so-called decentralized government, as they do away with a nation state. That's the whole idea, decentralization, and put you down into your little regions with your so many communes inside each region. And you'll have to deal with the problems yourself. Now, here's an article here on that. It's from The Guardian, which is as far left as you can imagine. They're all for the IPCC and they have their own environmental push as well for this ecological society. That means everything has to come under economics and sustainability, you see, in the planet and population reduction. That's what they mean by ecological society.